Remember this?
Let's just say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us. I will say that I would not trust Donald Trump, and it would have to be a credible source of information that talks about the efficacy and the reliability of whatever he's talking about. I will not take his word for it. He wants us to inject bleach. No, I will not take his word.
And would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice President Kamala Harris and her past public speculation over the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine came back into play yesterday during a heated debate between the co-hosts of The View about the return of pandemic restrictions. Let's watch.
Trump poisoned the well from the beginning, refused to listen to the science, and so a lot of people, probably maybe in the millions, still never have gotten vaccinated.
Right.
And that's where this all started. So you can blame the Rose Garden, or you can blame Nancy Pelosi, but she didn't start this war.
Oh, no, and I have been a very outspoken Republican that everyone should get vaccinated. They should get boosted. As soon as I can get a fourth booster, I'm going to get it. But I will say this. There were things that were said by Democrats early on that politicized the virus.
Like
it
what?
is a fact that
Like
Vice
what?
President Harris
Give me an
said,
example.
I'm not going to... Vice President Harris said
You
in
were
the
part of the
VP
administration that politicized the virus.
Oh, and I take responsibility. Donald Trump politicized the hell out of this virus. But Vice President Kamala Harris in the vice presidential debate said, if Dr. Fauci says I should get it, I will, but I'm not getting a Trump vaccine. That's dangerous. That leads people... Kamala Harris
That was way after this vaccine
but that
was
doesn't change the
politicized by
fact.
your boss.
No, I mean, I take responsibility there.
Thank you.
Let's get some initial reactions from our rising panel. Emily Jashinsky is culture editor at The Federalist, and Democratic strategist Nicole Brener-Schmitz joins us now to discuss. Welcome. Emily, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, actually, there's an interesting moment where Joy Behar is talking about how Donald Trump poisoned the well first. And this gets into a really important question about like who is throwing the first punch in all of these silly wars. And I don't think that there's a scenario in which Donald Trump could have, under his administration, come out with a vaccine and you wouldn't have had that exact same reaction from Kamala Harris. I don't think that was conceivable because of the times that we exist in. I mean, just about anything that Donald Trump said, whether it was political or not, it didn't matter. It got politicized, and that's not entirely for no fault on his behalf. Of course, he would politicize things needlessly. So, of course. But the point is that we can't even have these conversations. And I remember we talked about this on Rising over the summer last year, that we cannot actually have life and death conversations, matters of life and death, because we are so politicized that even when somebody does something right and says something correct, you can't have a proper conversation about it because it's inevitable. There is no chicken or egg in this situation. There is just the egg.
Yeah, I give Alyssa a lot of credit for saying, that she was in the administration. She doesn't stand by everything they did. She's become kind of harshly critical of a lot of Trump world stuff. Obviously, Alyssa, by the way, if anybody was unaware, she has co-hosted Rising in the past, so she is a friend of the show. But she was pointing out that, there was a lot of skepticism, to say the least, about the vaccine when it was the Trump administration's project. Nicole, has that just kind of been totally forgotten or whitewashed by liberals and Democrats at this point?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think comparing what Kamala Harris said in those couple interviews before medical professionals had given their blessing to this vaccine, and when we had already learned that at the beginning of COVID, Trump had more information than he let on, he had lied, the administration had misled us, is comparing apples and fire trucks. Certainly both sides over the past 2 years have politicized this a bit, but to compare what the White House did at the beginning of this COVID and the now vice president being hesitant before the medical professional said that we should take the vaccine is a ridiculous comparison.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like a lot of reasonable hesitancy or uncertainty about how many boosters are needed, or is the benefit of the vaccine really greater than the risk if we're talking about very young people and all that stuff? That gets treated as total deranged lunacy by Democrats when there was plenty of hesitancy during a different political context. Is that not politicizing it?
I don't think it gets treated as deranged lunacy right now. There's certainly let's make sure we're doing what's medically appropriate. Let's make sure we're getting these vaccines to the folks who need them first. I'm the mother of a 4.5-year-old. I was diligent about looking into how the children's approval was going through. There's nothing wrong with being your own researcher for your family, but certainly Democrats were expressing what was needed at the time, which are the medical professionals telling us.
The Democrats want to require that in schools. Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing, Nicole. What strikes me about Kamala Harris's statement is that what she says is the kind of statement that you make when you want to create ambiguity where there is none. No president, of course it wasn't going to be the case that Donald Trump is in a laboratory tinkering with his toys and then mass distributes a vaccine that isn't, been vetted by the medical establishment and the CDC and Fauci and all of that. So it's just it feels like to me when people say some climate scientists, I only want to support the Green New Deal if scientists think X, Y, and Z. We know what the scientists say. We know what the outcome is going to be. So it really did feel to me in the moment like an attempt to sow a certain amount of discord for political purposes in the lead up to a general election. Do you disagree?
I don't want to gloss over the fact that this is an administration who did not say, oh no, don't take the horse tranquilizer. I mean, they weren't coming out clear to tell people that some things that were out there were bad. They were not doing that. They were letting doctors who had questionable medical credentials and past come out there with this kind of information. So at that point in September of 2020, that's still where we were. An administration that was not telling the American people, this is actually not going to fix COVID, and in fact is very bad for you. So I think you can't forget the moment that we were in when she was making these statements.
So that's what's so interesting to me about this clip and the reaction to it. I'm going to come to you in a second, Emily. But I am completely cognizant of and frustrated by the misinformation that's come out of the right. I've been inundated with it. I have no confusion about it. But what was striking to me about this clip is how none of the panelists outside of Alyssa seemed to be aware at all that there were any critiques from the right about the way the left, the way liberals have handled this issue. It is, I tell you, an incredibly freeing and liberating experience to be a leftist who's kind of decoupled from both of these kind of propagandistic mainstream news cycles, because none of this stuff comes as a surprise. And what's really frustrating and scary to me is that so much of the discourse is fulminated in complete and total ignorance. Emily, what's your take?
I couldn't have said it better possibly myself. And I similarly feel very liberated, when you're decoupled from the sort of official apparatuses of party politics and institutions. Yes, it is very liberating because you can stop and say, that cut of Joy Behar's face when Alyssa said that the Kamala Harris, she's like, who said it? And Alyssa's like, Kamala Harris. And Joy Behar just looks as like, you should know that. I mean, that was a huge moment. And conservative media was completely right to cover it as they did, because in September of 2020, it's important to not be talking. I actually think it makes it worse that things were uncertain at the time, because she didn't know. She had no reason really to be casting doubt on a vaccine that, as Brianna points out, was not being developed in a laboratory by Donald Trump in a lab coat, but by actual medical professionals, pharmaceutical companies that create all of the other drugs we take. And so I think it actually makes it worse that she said it at that time, because all she had to go off of was the fact that it was being developed under the presidency of Donald Trump. And I guess on the left, that's enough. But I don't think it actually is when you consider the fact that it's in the hands of medical professionals and pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
Nicole, let me ask you this. Were you aware of those Kamala Harris clips? And do you think the average liberal voter, viewer was aware of those clips?
I was aware, but in full confidence, I live in Washington, D.C., and live in a bubble of sorts where that was covered on. But
they do a daily news talk show.
Campaign. It was a big moment. I do think she wasn't just casting doubt on the vaccine as a whole. I think she was saying, when the doctors who are developing it, when Dr. Fauci, when the CDC tells me to take it, then I will. I'm just not going to do it the moment Donald Trump tells me to. I'm going to do it when those medical professionals who are developing it are taking it. But again, we can pick apart the slight nuance of how she frames that sentence all day long, and none of us be right or wrong.
Do you remember when Whoopi Goldberg just confidently asserted that Dr. Jill Biden was a
real doctor?
That was
we got to cancel the View for misinformation.
Whoopi would take that vaccine.
Oh boy! All right, Nicole and Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.